So this lesson is entitled the Gupta Dynasty. And this is part 4 of a 4-part series on classical India. And this is our last lesson for the classical period of world history. Let's get started. Right, so we know about the fall of the Mauryan dynasty, right? After Ashoka's death, Buddhism lacked the same level of state support. Remember, under Ashoka and under the Mauryans, Buddhism is a state religion. You know, there's lots of money being put into building these stupas, you know, kind of like a church or a temple. There's all this spreading of Buddhism out into the rest of the world. But after the fall of the Mauryan dynasty, that's all done. And, you know, Buddhism is kind of an ascetic religion. It's kind of about withdrawing from society a little bit. And they had developed this strong system of monasteries. And so these Buddhist monks retreat into those monasteries and have less influence on people's day-to-day lives. And so, you know, Hinduism starts to have this renewal, starts to come back in a big way. And remember what I've told you, syncretism is a mixing, right? So after, you know, Buddhism kind of starts to fade and disappear from the lives of everyday Indians, the Brahmins start to adopt some of these Buddhist myths and beliefs. Said it's syncretism. The Buddhists become a little bit more monotheistic. Remember, mono meaning one, theos meaning God. You know, and they adopt in a belief in the release from reincarnation, right? The early Vedic religions and early Hinduism, you know, you're going to constantly be reincarnated forever. And if you're good, you get to go up the caste system. If you're bad, you get to go down the caste system. But they did develop a belief structure that people could be released from reincarnation. And they started to give more rights to women in the lower castes. Now, that doesn't mean everybody was equal and everything was happy and everybody was singing "We Shall Overcome." Nothing like that. I mean, it's still patriarchal. It still stunk to be an untouchable, literally, because they were picking up garbage in the streets. But things got a little bit better. Buddhism had an influence on Hinduism. Right? And, you know, there's political fragmentation in India. Everything's busted up. It's, you know, it's the cycle of civilization or the cycle of dynasties, as we know so well from looking at China. And so into this power vacuum comes the Gupta dynasty. And the Guptas were a whole big family of wealthy landowners from eastern India. And they kind of built the empire from the remnants of the Mauryan Empire through political alliances and small military victories. So they were not conquerors, right? The Mauryans were conquerors. The Guptas were more like, you know, they were politicians. They were deal makers. It wasn't about conquering, it was, hey, let's work together. They're kind of the smoother empire, kind of similar to the way in which the Qin were the hardcore conquerors of China and the Han were the more smooth political, I don't want to say intelligent, but more strategic, I guess. And they built what we call a tribute empire. And this is a new vocab word for us in world history, right? Tribute empire, right? Local kings ruled completely, and they only had to pay verbal respect to the Guptas. It's like, yeah, the Guptas are in charge, but I'm making all the laws and telling you what to do. So, you know, and they also had to give the Guptas regular tribute. And tribute is things like money or food or other goods like animals, you know, war elephants and things like that. So as long as the Guptas got paid, they didn't have to come beat anyone up. And it was good for the local kings because they could say, hey, the Guptas are going to come in here and beat you up if, you know, if we don't keep it cool. So, you know, a very loose empire, very different from the centralized power of something like Rome or the Han Dynasty or the Mauryans. Okay. And so like I said, you know, the Guptas were Hindu, And so under their rule, the Brahmins regained the religious power in India, as well as a lot of that behind-the-scenes power that I talked about in lesson number 1. And so like I said, we get this renewal of caste and patriarchy. It gets stronger than it was under the Buddhist Mauryans. The women lose status and firmly become the property of their fathers and later their husbands. It's kind of an interesting thing, too. And we saw this in the Livy source that we read from Rome, and we're going to see this in the Law of Manu that we're going to read from India, is that, a woman kind of has 3 phases. She's born and she's under the control of her father. She's married. She's under the control of her husband. After her husband dies, she's under the control of her oldest son. And we see that in the Law of Manu. So like I said, the Hindus were better to women in the lower castes than they were before Buddhism. But like I said, it wasn't a happy time for women in the lower castes under the Guptas. However, the Guptas did have a lot of achievements. These were not evil people. They were not conquerors. In fact, there was a lot of science and art and philosophy that went forward under the Guptas. An explosion of beautiful architecture, advancements in poetry and drama and philosophy and religious epics. Big improvements in mathematics, right? The concept of pi was developed, as well as what we call Arabic numerals. We call them Arabic numerals because Europe learned those numbers from the Arabs, but the Arabs had learned them from the Indians. Advancements in medicine, particularly in the developments of certain kinds of surgery and hospitals as, a very specific place to go and do medicine. So like I said, cultural life, social life under the Guptas was tougher for the lower castes and the women, but a lot of the cultural and scientific advancements that took place during this time period happened under the Guptas. Right? The Guptas, as we know, were wealthy landowners and big traders. So India starts to have more trade with the world, much more long-distance trade. Although you got to keep in mind this is mostly coastal trade. They don't have compasses. They don't have big ocean-going ships. So the biggest trips they can take is a short jump across the Arabian Sea to East Africa. But we know that Indians traded all along the coast of East Africa, up through the Red Sea, into the Persian Gulf. And we know this usually because of coins, but also precious gems and metals and works of art and things like that. But, like I said, most of Indian trade happened along the coasts because, of course, India is kind of blocked off by the Himalayas in the Hindu Kush mountains. India is almost kind of its own little island because of the mountains. And so most of their trade is these small ocean-going vessels. This is going to be a big focus in period 3 of world history, which will be our next unit. But again, advancements in trade under the Guptas. But they did decline. This has been a big theme in this whole unit, is the rise and fall of civilizations. But remember with the Guptas, it's a very loosely held empire. And, with these loosely held empires and these tribute empires, when they break up, it's not as violent. It's not as catastrophic because there's no central power. People are kind of used to doing their own thing anyways. We do see some invasions from the Huns. These are those Central Asian horse people, and they strike again, rampaging down through Afghanistan, Pakistan, across the Khyber Pass and into India proper. And when they do that, the local kings just kind of break away. It's like, if the Guptas can't protect us, forget them. We're not giving them money. We better take care of our own. But it's an interesting thing, right? Here's the Central Asian horse people again. I'm fascinated with these people, and I can't wait till our lessons on the Mongols in Unit 3. It's just fascinating people. If you're interested in warfare and military strategy, I don't think there's anyone more interesting than the Huns and the Xiongnu and the Mongols, the horse people. So that's it. Lesson completed. That was part 4 of our series on India. That was our last lesson on the classical period. Let's all have a little whoopee, and thanks for watching.